Hello, I'm Claire Jewitt, and this is the Diary of an Orange Cat. The diary entries of a thoughtful, slightly neurotic ginger cat living in a small harbour community in New Zealand. Last time, in party games, Weasley unexpectedly found himself becoming leader of the local cat cabinet after Seraphina's political career came to a rather abrupt end. Although he never wanted the job in the first place, he nevertheless resolved to throw himself into leadership with enthusiasm and make his mark on the community. This week, however, his honeymoon period proves to be remarkably short-lived. A house move, a controversial policy proposal, an injured kererū, and an awkward encounter with the local press soon teach Weasley that leadership can be a complicated business indeed. This is conflict of interest. I had absolutely no ambition to become leader and was perfectly happy being deputy leader for approximately 8 days. Unfortunately, circumstances conspired against me. One minute, I was drafting reforms to the education system, admittedly with very little idea what an education system actually is, and next I was leader. Humans often speak of a honeymoon period for new leaders. I rather liked the sound of that. It suggested treats, admiration, and perhaps some sort of ceremonial fish. As it turns out, a honeymoon period can also involve moving house, appointing family members to important positions, dealing with journalists, and concealing an injured kererū beneath a pile of leaves. I was beginning to wonder whether leadership was all it was cracked up to be. Tuesday, 2nd of May, 2023. As a new leader, I was keen to make my mark and take advantage of the honeymoon period of popularity that I'd heard about. In the first few weeks of my term, I wasted no time making plans to scrap some of Seraphina's misguided policies and implement a few of my own. Out with the old and in with the new, I declared, determined to show my constituents that I was a leader who meant business. It was time to make a statement, and I was ready to make it loud and clear. Unfortunately, I was just a few weeks into my new leadership role when one of the worst things that can happen to a cat happened to me. We moved house. Surely this must be due to my new position, like moving into number 10 Downing Street or to the White House. I soon realised that this was not the case. As it happened, we only moved about 300 metres up the road. It's a nice house, and I'm not complaining, although Mummy has imposed a rather draconian rule that I must remain indoors until I become accustomed to my new surroundings. Apparently, cats who are allowed outside too soon after moving house sometimes become confused and try to return to their old homes. I considered this highly unlikely and a gross insult to my intelligence. When I took over as leader, I'd announced that meetings would be held every Tuesday under the deck at the old house, and I was concerned that my new living arrangements may not have filtered through to my cabinet colleagues. Strangely, this is how I arrived at one of my new policy ideas. I managed to orchestrate a cunning plan that enabled me to sneak out of the house while Mummy, who has MS, was struggling to get in and out of the front door with her crutch while laden with boxes. I'd been waiting for this opportunity and raced round to the old place. As I waited for the others to arrive for our 2:30 p.m. meeting, I noticed how cold and empty the house looked now that we'd moved all of our belongings out, and I wondered how soon it would be before the new residents moved in. A lot of cats get completely lost when they move house, I said after everyone arrived and we'd run through a few formalities. What I propose to do is introduce compulsory microchipping for cats. You'll struggle to gain support for compulsory chipping, warned Seraphina. She hadn't quite been able to step back completely from bossing everyone around, and among other things, was now acting as a consultant. A mandatory measure would be a very courageous decision, cautioned Squeak. Then let's be courageous. Are we not descendants of lions, the most courageous of beasts? Let's do this. Should we call you Chippy then? Ron giggled at his own whimsical wordplay. Madeline says that they inject cats with dog DNA when they microchip them, remarked Seraphina gravely. Madeline is a dog and therefore is an idiot, said Smoky O'Neill, who had taken over the dog portfolio from Seraphina. And while they're at the vet, it should be compulsory to have them neutered, said Spook, who held the kitten portfolio. Great idea, I declared in full lion mode now. The chip and snip mandate. Oh, God, said Squeak, I'm foreseeing all sorts of unforeseen problems. As if Squeak's words were a prophecy, it was at that very moment that an unforeseen problem manifested itself. We'd been happily discussing our plans for implementing our various policy initiatives for nearly 2 hours, and I was keen to wrap things up before it got dark. I was just about to say as much when we heard a dull thud above us. It was as if someone had thrown a soft, heavy object at the sliding door leading to the lounge. With hearts pounding, we all rushed onto the deck and found that a kererū, looking very drunken and bloated, had clearly found a source of overripe fruit and had been gorging itself before crashing into the ranch slider. "Don't touch it!" growled Smoky O'Neill as I rushed up to the prostrate body lying on the deck. "Shouldn't we check to see if it's alive?" I said. "If it isn't, then I think our post-cabinet supper has arrived," said Ron slyly, raising an eyebrow. Squeak tried unsuccessfully to disguise a hopeful look, but Smoky O'Neill was quick to position himself between Ron and the battered-looking kererū. "What we should do is go home, now, and sure up about this. A kererū dropping dead in the middle of a group of cats? How's that going to look?" I had to admit that he was right, and secretly wished that I, as leader, had been the one to spot this and give the cabinet guidance on the correct protocols to adopt. Thankfully, my big brother Winston, whom I'd made deputy leader only hours earlier, came to my aid.
"Seraphina, please return home and see if you can contact the woman in Diamond Harbour who's skilled in caring for sick and injured birds. Smoky O'Neill should lead this operation until she certifies life extinct or recommends a wildlife sanctuary where the bird can be taken so that it receives the proper medical attention. Meanwhile, Squeak can assist me in concealing the kererū with leaves and branches. At 4:30, a journalist from the Peninsula Post will be arriving for a post-cabinet press conference, and we cannot afford to have them get wind of this situation. Weasley, go out onto the footpath and keep watch. Ron, you escort the others back under the deck and find activities to keep them occupied."
"What's the time now?" I asked.
"It's 4:20,
replied Winston. 4:20, whooped Ron. "Come on, everybody, under the deck now." "How's Crash the kererū?" Ron asked when we were all back below deck after completing the cover-up operation. "Crash the kererū is now covered. I don't think he's dead, but it looks like he's injured his wing rather badly," I said. "Seraphina's still waiting for the bird lady, and the reporter will be here any minute." After that, pretty much everything went completely pear-shaped. I blame Ron, whose idea of keeping the others amused was to give them so much catnip that virtually none of the cabinet could remember what their portfolios were. The reporter from the Peninsula Post duly arrived, and one of the first questions he asked me was, "How would you define a woman?" What a peculiar question. I could see Winston shaking his head in a cautionary way. After the events of the afternoon, I was keen to fob this one off to one of my cabinet colleagues and head home. "Speak to Spook," I replied, well pleased with my clever alliteration. My esteemed female cabinet colleague in charge of gender issues and things like domestic violence. "Oh, I've spoken to Spook," said the reporter, also enjoying the play on words, "and he was well versed on the subject of domestic violence. He told me he knows what causes all the cat violence in Diamond Harbour. According to Spook, it's caused by grey male tabbies." "Did she? He?" My jaw dropped to the ground. I'd known Spook for a couple of years now and never considered the possibility that he might be anything other than female. "Well, that's probably quite correct." Hell, that wasn't the right thing to say to this reporter, who had just noticed to my horror was a grey male tabby. Thankfully, Cookie cut in at this point. "Sweetie, you're oversimplifying what really is a very complex issue, she said to the reporter. It's a very complicated situation.
I think it would be fair to say that Weasley doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with this right now,
Interjected Ron.
Weasley's only been leader for a couple of weeks. He's giving it 110% and has really hit the ground running. He's created the right synergies to smash through the glass ceiling. The new normal will be to think outside the box and pivot so that we can go after the low-hanging fruit. Tell you what, let's circle back and take this offline. Ping me and let's touch base at a later date.
What a team, I thought to myself. The journalist, however, was undeterred by Ron's odd ramblings or Cookie's complexity assertions.
I have reliable sources that confirm Weasley's origins can be traced back to a distinguished family in Diamond Harbour. It's not surprising that his sister, Serafina Pekkala, has been appointed as a well-paid consultant. His brother Winston has been named deputy leader and chief political advisor. Grey Worm, yet another family member, heads a successful consultancy firm with numerous lucrative contracts. There has even been a statue erected in Burau dedicated to their mother Lily.
The reporter paused to take a breath before asking, "Would you like me to continue?" Why do the media always need to be muckraking like this? Why can't they talk about our successes? I whispered to Ron and Squeak.
At least he doesn't seem to have noticed Crash, said Ron, rather too loudly, I thought.
I think it's time we went home, said Squeak, and everyone dispersed and went back to their respective homes. I realised that I wanted to go home too. I really wanted to go home. This place wasn't home anymore. There was no furniture in the house. There was no bowl. There was no mummy. Ron stayed for a while and we finished off the catnip before he said, "See you, Chippy," and he headed home. I rose to my feet and tried to walk, but my steps were unsteady and unsure. The sky had turned to darkness and my mind was a blur. I couldn't be sure if this was the lingering effects of the catnip or simply the traumatic events of the day. What I did know was that I had no recollection of where my new home was. Panic set in as I let out a desperate meow. When I had retraced my steps back to the old house earlier in the day, the ground had seemed flat and manageable. Now it was a steep, treacherous climb that I struggled to conquer. It was all I could do to fight my way up the gradient. The world around me faded into darkness as I stumbled into the nearest hedge and lost consciousness. Saturday, 6th of May, 2023. Thankfully, I'd only made it as far as the neighbour's house. I spent a couple of nights sleeping rough before Mummy, who must have realised where I'd be, set up a humane cat trap. I fell for it, of course, and spent a very unpleasant night ensnared in the hideous contraption. When morning came, she took me home, gave me some treats and a cuddle, and all was forgiven. I sat on Mummy's lap, purring loudly as we watched King Charles's coronation on television this evening. I don't envy King Charles one bit. Being a famous public figure might be all very well, but it's not for me. That was conflict of interest. As Weasley discovered, being leader isn't quite as glamorous as it first appears. Within a matter of weeks, he'd proposed controversial new policies, found himself at the centre of an unexpected wildlife incident, had been accused of nepotism and conflicts of interest by the local press. But beneath all the political drama lies something rather more serious. Weasley still hasn't come to terms with moving house, and he's beginning to feel that the place he once called home is slipping away. Join us next time in episode 22, Deep Trouble, when a chance encounter with a neighbourhood cat sends Weasley running back to his old house and into an adventure that leaves the whole of Diamond Harbour wondering where their favourite ginger cat has disappeared to. Until then, from Weasley, Serafina, and all of the cats of Diamond Harbour, thank you for listening.